This is Ask Brock. I'm Brock Yordy. This week's question comes from Brian. Brock, what's the best way to test sand content for well development? An Imhoff cone, 5-gallon bucket, a pickle jar? A pickle jar. It's a great question. And we see a lot of Imhoff cones because it's an industry standard. Yet, if I pull out my groundwater and wells book, what's the first thing that it says when we start looking at measuring sediment content? That the Imhoff cone randomly selected samples is not that accurate. So what do I need to do? I need to look at my amount of time for aquifer testing. And I want to take my first sample within that first 10 to 15 minutes of production. Then I look at my elapsed time that I'm going to be doing this aquifer test. Let's say it's a 6-hour test. 25% into that elapsed time, I'm going to take my next sample, and then 50%, and then 75%. And then somewhere between that 10 to 5 minutes before I shut down. And I'm going to average those out. I'm going to graph it and see where I'm at. We know that the AWWA standard is less than 5 parts per million sediment content. However, if we're doing a production well that is going to be for cold brew coffee or kombucha, or my favorite thing, craft beer, we're supposed to be under 1 parts per million. A year ago, I got to go to the groundwater and wells course in Colorado, and Tom Hannon team taught us. And one of the great things was we had this big discussion about sediment content, and Tom likes using a 5-gallon bucket. And if we look in there and we see that we have the amount of sand in the bottom of that sediment, we're talking about particle size now, it's enough to cover a dime. That's at least 10 parts per million. And I think that's a great reference as well. Again, if we go back to the groundwater and wells book, it talks about using a centrifugal sand separator measurement, which I've yet to see on site, but I know is used. So what does it really come down to? For my residential home, I'm using my Imhoff, I'm using my 5-gallon bucket, and I'm measuring, and I want to have as much of a sediment-free well as possible. And I'm doing that from my well design to my screen selection to my gravel pack selection. If I'm doing it on a larger scale, I'm collaborating with my hydrogeologist and my design firm to understand. Got my butt kicked in South Carolina on a dang turbid well that all of the wells in that field blew dirty. And we had to, pump them for a while before they settled down. And it wasn't a sand-sized particle, but it was turbidity that was getting into us. It's a great question. Talk with your team, talk with your scientists, and understand that we need to be under 5 parts per million. And we go from there. Good luck, Brian. Thanks.